on my right is Gary Johnston, the boss of JCar. Now, if you're a rugby league person, you know that this is the bloke who pulled the plug on a Canterbury Bankstown sponsorship after that extraordinary Mad Monday performance in a pub at the Rocks. I don't blame him for that. I thought that was one of the worst displays, given that the coach and everybody else were there. I'll never understand how it could actually happen. But Gary has more interest than merely selling gadgets and gizmos. He's made a passion of thinking about submarines. Now, as you're all aware, a couple of years back, when I say we, Australia awarded a contract to build new submarines in Adelaide. It was with a French company and was supposed to have a whiz-bang way of being quiet. And of course, the big criticism of the last set of submarines was as soon as they left port in Adelaide, they didn't need sonar, they could hear them in Beijing, because apparently they were awfully loud. But this new one is supposed to be the whiz-bang expert thing that'll really work for us. I think Gary may well have some differing views to that. Would that be the case, Gary?
It would, Graham, and firstly, thank you for having me on your program. The whole problem with the Turnbull government's choice of the French wasn't apparent in April 2016 when they made the announcement that the submarines would be based on a French nuclear vessel with a diesel engine in it, which was astonishing enough. It was to be made with Australian steel, and in Adelaide, they can't make wind turbines in Adelaide because they know that they could never make them in a competitive way. But a submarine is about 1,000 times more complicated. They could make submarines in Adelaide, but we'll pay a dear price for it.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's pork barrelling and that's winning votes. That's okay.
Well, you've got to get, I've said this very often. Adelaide has to have a reason to be there. There's 1 million people and they've lost the car industry upon which that 1 million people were really based. And so if you don't have some industries down there, then it's in real trouble. So governments, both sides, because Labor certainly did it, you throw things to South Australia to keep them going. It
would have been far cheaper to keep the Elizabeth plant open. They were churning out a first-class product in the Commodore. It was up with build quality of BMW, and so was the Ford Falcon for that matter, and the Camry. They even subsidised cars in Germany, which exports like crazy. There's no reason why we shouldn't have a modest subsidy for car manufacture in Australia. It would have employed a lot more people for a lot less money than trying to build 12 submarines.
And what's the cost of 12 submarines?
Well, it was announced at the time of $50 billion. It's now gone up to $80 billion, which is an eye-watering amount of money. We'll argue about giving the ABC $1.5 billion, and yet that's about what this submarine's going up with. That's $6.5 billion a throw. That's right. You could buy the Japanese Soryo class submarine, a much more modern design, for about $1 billion. And the Germans will guarantee to make their version of the submarine in Adelaide at a fixed price, sovereign guarantee. Sovereign guarantee. The problem is that there were some pretty good deals around and the Defence Department ignored them because they had stars in their eyes about the propulsion system, which you briefly mentioned in your introduction, which is called pump jet. Now, the Germans and the Japanese were blindsided by this because they know it doesn't work in a diesel submarine. The French said, we'll give you what you want. The Defence Department are still starry-eyed about this, and they gave the French the inside running because of this. Now the French are backing out. They're backing out of this. They've come to Australia and said, oh, maybe we should reconsider going back to propellers. The Defence Department don't want to listen to this. Our syndicate, appointed a physicist to look into whether it was possible, and he wrote a great big thick paper about it, presented it to the Senate Estimates Committee, and they accepted it. It's technically sound. It proves that pump jet doesn't work with diesel submarines because it uses too much power. Nuclear submarines have got power, endless power. Diesel submarines, you've got to worry about even putting the kettle on at the wrong time. And the pump jet uses so much power, which forces the submarine to resurface and charge its batteries, which makes it vulnerable. So the pump jet gives, in a nuclear submarine, a very little small window of extra performance for a very short period of the speed range. And it's just a ridiculous assertion. I think that that alone should enable the government to say, look, we really need to discuss this again. You promised us pump jet, now you're saying no. They also want to make it in France too. If you heard about that.
Big surprise.
That's right. They want to make it in France. It's a pork barrel thing over there.
So where are we actually up to? I mean, at this...
We're up to nothing. We've got a few pieces of paper on a drawing board.
Have we got any... Is there any structure of a sub built?
Nothing. We've lost 2 years. See, we can't even really cancel the contract with the French because we've just lost another 2 years of kerfuffle. The bottom line is this, that this so-called diesel version of a French submarine is never going to happen. It's going to take too long. We're going to be out of submarines completely for at least 15 years. We're going to be defenceless. Yeah, it's called a capability gap. But they're talking now about refurbishing the plant.
I mean, I remember as a cabinet minister being briefed on submarines, being briefed on, I think we had the frigates. And of course, the defence guys would come in. Malcolm something or other was his name. I'm just trying to remember it. He finished up in England. And there's a mountain of stuff. Now, you're a busy minister. I think at the time I was Social Security. I mean, I had plenty to do. It's not as if I was, you know, lying around on the beach.
That's right.
And you look at it and you say, well, I can't read that. And if I did, I'm not an engineer. I don't understand most of this stuff. So you're really, as a cabinet, and it doesn't matter whether it's a Liberal Labor government or what year it is, you are still dependent upon the advice you receive.
That's right.
So why would Defence accept this if it's as flawed as you say so?
There's a fundamental problem with the defence military acquisition process. As the smartest person in the 20th century said, Albert Einstein, he said, doing the same...
Well, that was Malcolm Turnbull, but anyway.
Maybe the 21st century. One definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again but expecting a different result.
Yeah.
Some people say other people said that, but I'm crediting Einstein with it. The fact is that the Defence Department have a process where they have talented people who go through the ranks of the Defence Department. They're tank drivers, they're aeroplane drivers, they're ship drivers, and at the end of their career, they're given a job to choose military hardware because they're vice admirals and that sort of thing, air vice commodores. They have never been trained to do that. They've been trained to be very good out in the field. And this is the problem. They have no idea of risk management. They have no idea of money. They don't have to worry about what a bullet costs when they're in Afghanistan, and nor should they. Someone else should be worried about that. But they're then given a job at the end of their careers to choose these eye-watering amounts of expenditure with very little skill set that they've learned over the years. We propose that you completely change the process of acquiring military hardware. And that is, and you would know this, we're the best miners in the world. We can dig mines in the middle of foreign countries and make them work and make money. We have a huge pool of executives and entrepreneurs who know how to choose to spend money wisely and carefully with huge risk management, and they're the sort of people who should form a commission to oversee large military purchases. I'll guarantee you this, we would save half of our military expenditure on hardware if we just did that. But do you think the Department of Defence in Russell Hill would...
They're not going to give that up.
No, they're not going to give that up. That's right.
They'll go to war with you to
That's right.
defend that.
But yet the money that's being spent and wasted... You remember the Sea Sprite helicopter fiasco, the Tiger helicopter out of Europe. They've just made a decision to buy a British air warfare destroyer that doesn't exist. It's on paper. There was an Italian destroyer that's like a Holden Commodore. It's sold all around the world, beautiful ship. They didn't want that because they couldn't get any credit for backing the one that could be a winner.
Well, having said all of that, let's go back a step. What did you think of the Collins class?
That was Kim Beazley, basically. The Collins class was a good idea at a time when the idea of nuclear submarines was totally and utterly verboten, as you know.
Anathema,
an anathema. There's been a slow drift towards acceptance of nuclear power. You see, with submarines, the advantage of a nuclear power plant in a submarine is so enormous, it's very hard to look past. They are so much more efficient. They can cruise underwater faster than they can on the surface. A diesel-electric submarine can only do 4 knots underwater. It can't keep up in a convoy. It can't keep up. A nuclear submarine can keep up. That's number one. Number two, a nuclear...
The whole idea is to protect convoys.
Well, that's exactly right. It's too slow. It lags behind, yes. They've got to keep surfacing, and surfacing these days with satellite radar is very dangerous because they'll pick you up in a second, they'll get a fix on you, and a cruise missile will come and blow you to pieces. I really fear for any military personnel who, if it comes to pass, work in submarines in 2030 and 2040 and it's a diesel, I think we'll have very serious problems getting crew for that because they'll say, I'm not going down in that. I'm not going down in that. It's too dangerous. You can't even get crews for Collins-class submarines.
No, I know. That's been a big problem. I actually asked the Defence Minister about that some years back, but they always try and jump around it. So I know recruitment's going well. They won't actually specifically talk about the recruitment for
I've been in the Senate Estimates Committee briefing Pauline Hanson, and I think it's a disgrace the way the public servants mislead people in that. The point that I made is I think really valid, and that is that because if you're a cabinet minister, you're not an engineer, you don't understand these things, you have to take advice. If the advice is flawed, well, we're all in strife. Because it's very flawed.
Yeah, well, I think that's terrifying, actually.
One of the great tragedies that's not well known is that the Navy wiped out their technical department in about 1998, about 400 engineers. And they were the people that gave the technical assessment of air warfare destroyers and submarines and helicopters. And they don't have that facility anymore. That should immediately be reinstated, immediately, because the people who are given the job to choose the next submarine, the Greg Sammets of this world, they're doing their best and they're honest people. They're people of high integrity, but they're out of their depth. They're totally out of their depth. They were never trained for this sort of exercise. So we think, bottom line, the irony is that the French have got a nuclear submarine, which we're trying to put a diesel engine in, the nuclear submarine sitting on a slipway in Cherbourg, and it's perfect for our needs. It's perfect. It's better than the American one.
There's built resistance from both sides of politics to a nuclear sub.
We have to grow up.
Because they fear that the public will resent it. Now, every poll that you get on this, women in particular in Australia just don't want it. Fukushima did terrible harm.
Nobody died in Fukushima.
No, but
16,000 people drowned.
Areas are just wiped, and people won't live in them for a long time. It's scared the hell out of people here. And
Did you see 60 Minutes last Sunday?
No, I didn't, mate. I had a few other things to do on Sunday night. But I think it's the truth is that we've got to start to tackle this. We've got to start to tackle the nuclear argument head on, not only because of our difficulties with submarines, but other difficulties as well. If you want cheap power, the cheapest power you're going to get is nuclear. So
what a lot of people don't understand, they think a nuclear reactor is something that's on about 200 hectares and generates enough power for half a state. You can now buy what's called small modular reactors, which are basically the power plant out of a nuclear submarine. And they'll fit in the size of a city building. And these things are so reliable because they've got to work 1,000 metres below the ocean being depth charged. And let me tell you, they're pretty ruggedised. They work very well on the surface, making boiling water and and machining turbines, and they come from about 50 megawatts up to about 300 megawatts. We could buy them. They're made by Westinghouse, they're made by the Canadians, they're made by the Chinese, they're made by the Koreans, and they're fantastic. We don't have to bulldoze a suburb to build a power station.
I know that, and you know that. We've got to go out and convince people.
And they don't break.
And I don't think our major parties are in that business at the moment.
Well,
mate, I have to leave it there. I'm sorry.
Thank you again, Graham.
In my ears, because we've gone over time.
Oh,
that was fascinating. So I hope we can talk again about this.
I'd love it. I'd love it.
There's more questions that I'd like to ask, but
yeah,
there's a limited time on these shows, and we've just hit it. Thanks very much, mate.
Thank you.